Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Art Like Everything Else, the podcast where we use art to talk about literally everything else. This week, I want to talk about where does the love go? And for that conversation, I have two pieces of art that I watched and enjoyed, and I want to use those to jump this conversation off. So let's hop right into this conversation. Our first piece of art is actually the movie Blue Valentine from 2010. So this movie was directed by Derek Cianfrance and it was written by Cianfrance along with Cami Delevingne and Joey Curtis. And the movie is rated R, so if you're on the younger side, it's not recommended you watch it. But the movie overall, I think, did a good job of sort of essentially capturing what I want today's conversation to be about, which is where does the love go? So I'm going to read the movie description. So in case you want to go back and watch the movie, or if you want to go back and watch the movie, you can do so without it being spoiled. Um, Honestly, the description of the movie is more or less what I'm going to be talking about anyway. So there won't be too much of a spoiler, but spoiler warnings just in case, because sometimes I just be talking and some things come up. So if you want a 100% spoiler-free version of the movie, pause, go watch it, come back. But with that being said, here's the non-spoiler description of what happens in the movie, and then I'm going to talk about how it relates to the conversation. So, description of the movie is the couple cannot halt the downward spiral of their marriage. And so this movie follows Cindy and Dean, who are married. And so something really cool in this movie is that like it is sort of broken up into different timelines, in that like we're seeing both the past when Dean and Cindy first met and how they first fell in love, and then we're also seeing them currently where they are in their marriage and how it's not what they hoped it would be. And so like what was really cool about this movie and the way it was filmed, I like that it kind of gave us that juxtaposition and it showed us how they had like that first sort of bubbly and kitty love, and how that came into and got them together. But then we also see it juxtaposed to like what the reality of their lives are now. So in this movie, you can kind of see how Cindy and Dean aren't nearly as compatible as they've gotten older as they were when they first got together. And you can see the strains that this is taking on their relationship, especially with the child involved. And you can see Dean trying to be this fun, supportive parent. And then you see Cindy, who's more kind of taking on a lot of responsibility and also like working and being a mother. And you can see the strain that like all of this has on their relationship. And you sort of see her almost just going through the motions for the most part throughout the movie. And then it kind of all comes to a head towards the end, and where she does just outright screams at Dean and tells him like, I do not love you anymore. And he's desperate to know what happened and desperate to know what went wrong or why that's the case. And it's a really, really touching film. Um, and if you want to watch it, I think it's a good show. It's a good watch. So definitely watch it. But that's just only the first part of the conversation. Like, where does the love go? Sometimes the love disappears in like the overwhelm of the rest of life. And I feel like that's what happened with Cindy, and that like in the beginning, like when she needed Dean, the love was there because she felt the support. She felt like the desire. She felt like she was a person to him. As the relationship went on, as their responsibilities grew, as she realized she wanted more, because also like she was, I believe she was still like relatively young. She was in college when she got pregnant and then married Dean. And so like she hadn't graduated yet. So this whole life of theirs all happened while they were relatively young and not as mature or understanding of the way that the world works really. And so like and then of course Cindy had an idea of what she didn't want her relationships to look like. And then Dean had an idea of what he felt like relationships should look like. And it didn't it wasn't compatible for them. And that love, especially on Cindy's side, eventually gave way. Cindy more or less realized she needed more, and it she wasn't getting that in that relationship. And she felt like she was harboring resentment towards Dean. Into our next work of art to kind of keep this conversation going. Okay. Alrighty, so for our second piece of art, I'm going to be talking about the movie Past Lives. So this movie was released in 2023 and it was written and directed by Celine Song. So this movie is also a really good movie. I'm glad I got to watch it. And I definitely recommend it. It's a romantic drama, so if you're into that, definitely watch it. Um, I liked a lot of this movie, and I liked also, so this is something that this movie had sort of similar with Blue Valentine in that like it follows two different timelines. So if you want a spoiler-free description of the movie, I'm going to read what the movie is about right now, and then I'm going to go a bit into detail after that, so you can stop listening after that and jump to our next section for the conversation. But I felt like this movie was a very, very good part of the conversation. And so I wanted to have it with today's episode. So let's do that. The movie is about Nora and Haesung, two deeply connected childhood friends, are arrested apart after Nora's family immigrates from South Korea. 20 years later, they are reunited for one fateful week as they confront notions of love and destiny. It's a really good movie, and that's what it's about. But I want to talk about how it relates a bit to today's conversation. With today's conversation being where does the love go? Nora and Haesung both were childhood sweethearts essentially, and that like they both liked each other, and so um they actually like went on like a little date almost like right before she actually left the country. And so like, and it was known about like by their parents and by everyone in like their friend group really that they liked each other. And so they were rather close, and then her family moved. And so it was kind of like that childhood love you have for somebody sort of existing and then leaving. Um, and this existed in a time before like cell phones, or like before like the way we have communication nowadays where it's really really easy to kind of get in contact with people across the world. It wasn't as easy when back then. So like when it came to keeping in touch or trying to like maintain that relationship, it was actually really really hard and really really difficult for them to do something like that. And so I think it was really this sort of like is how this conversation of like where does the love go, because in this movie we see Hae-sung, who by all intents and purposes is like still like he reached out and he had actually been looking for Nora for quite some time, and then like and she just didn't know. And he was just like she is somebody that's kind of just always been on his mind. And so we see them reconnect for a little bit, and then they get disconnected again, and then they reconnect a little bit, or then they sort of more or less meet, and we see them kind of come to terms and actually discuss like the nature of their feelings and the reality of the love that it did exist between them and what that looks like now and what that has to look like now. And I'm going to talk about that more in our actual conversation. So let's get into that. Righty. So with Valentine's Day quite literally just around the corner, and I also was just watching an anime called My Happy Marriage, and like there was a episode in it that sort of sparked this question to begin with, like with where does the love go? Um, and I thought these two movies would do a really good job of sort of helping this conversation go along, because I do think in life, in the world, and in the society we live in today, there can be both shame and disappointment in love that you feel you have but has no place to go. But then there's also frustration at the idea of love existing, especially in regards to a relationship that you can see is not working and you know is harmful or isn't exactly healthy for you. And so, take for example, in Blue Valentine, we know that Dean and Cindy aren't exactly working, and I think Cindy wanted to try to make things work because they have a kid. Um, but she sort of just had to come to the realization that the love she thought would be there for her husband at the time just wasn't there. And then you see Dean's disappointment in that, like, he he's frustrated and he's confused on where it went and what happened and he wants to fight for it. But sometimes their love does just dry up, or it hardens, or it crystallizes, or it becomes overwhelmed by all the other stressors and all the other frustrations that happen in life. Sometimes you're living and love is all that you have in a relationship, whether that's friendship, romance, or like even just like community. Sometimes the love is enough and sometimes it isn't, and it becomes a bit overwhelming to engage or to be a part of this idea that it's just not enough anymore, that the love you thought was enough, the love you thought would get you through everything isn't actually enough. And then we see in past lives how sometimes the love doesn't disappear even after 20 plus years, and even before then. So like Haesung hadn't seen Nora in at least 12 plus years, and he was still looking for her. The love that he felt for her in their childhood was still present, and it was almost like it didn't have anywhere to go. And then you see Nora kind of not necessarily like have the same type of love for Haesung, but you see that there was love still present even at like after they reconnected. She was able to like feel love for this version of her that was known by Haesung, and I thought that was really really interesting. So sometimes the love exists and it feels like it has nowhere to go, and there's almost like this frustration when you feel like the love should be enough, because that's something else that I think past lives sort of touches on in a roundabout way, because it's not even touched on directly through the movie but by the conversations I saw happening around the movie, and then what happened in Blue Valentine. So like in Blue Valentine, of course Dean is frustrated that like the relationship he had with Cindy isn't the same, and it isn't going to, it's just like their marriage is falling apart, and he's upset because he's like, where did the love go? Like the love that he had for her in the beginning, it should have been enough to last, or it should have been enough to satiate them. And then like there's conversations I've been seeing around past lives where people feel like Hae Sung's love for Nora should have been enough for her to uproot and change her entire life for Hae Sung. Like I've seen so many people sort of more or less express some like frustration that Hae Sung and Nora wasn't in game in that movie, despite Hae Sung showing that he had feelings for her and had looked for her ever since they were little. So it just has been like 20 plus years since they were young. When they finally do get to see each other again in person, they're upset that like Nora and Hae Sung aren't actually in game. And it goes to show that like in society we expect love to be enough, and that like love existing at all to be enough. You can see the way that people feel entitled to things because they love them, or because they feel like this A plus B should happen because I've been told that if A loves B, then A and B are meant to be together. And that's just not how real life works. Real life is a lot more complicated than that. And sometimes that's where the love's at. The love sometimes is overwhelmed by the complexity that life is. And sometimes that love doesn't have anywhere else to go. And so oftentimes it is our job to funnel that love into something else, or to direct the love we have, or the love that we want to give into something else. Because sometimes the object of said love that you have to offer isn't able to handle said love. Or maybe this is like also another part of the conversation. Sometimes I worry that there are people who may feel guilty for love existing for someone who has hurt them, because there's a lot of that societal sort of shame that tells you that like if they hurt you, you should sort of hate them, or you shouldn't have any type of feelings for them. But sometimes you do still feel love for them, and you can recognize that like, hey, while I love, or at least I love you, I don't like the harm that I'm being with, like, sort of impended upon, or the harm that's being caused to me. And so I am separate, because people do believe that, like, if love exists, then that means you're happy and that means you have to be together. But that's not always the case. And sometimes the love is always there. And so, like, sorry to the people who might have wanted a 100% spoiler-free watch of Blue Valentine, but, like, there's this very specific scene I want to talk about. At the end of the movie, so this isn't even the whole movie, so, like, it's not too spoilery, but at the end of the movie, after one of their big fights, Dean, like, takes his wedding ring off and throws it because he's upset about about Cindy saying she doesn't love him anymore. But before like they go home, he stops and goes and looks for it, because he still wants the ring. He still wants like the reminder of that love. And guess what? Cindy helps him. Like the love exists. They I feel like that was an example of like the love still existing. It just wasn't enough. And sometimes that's the case when it comes to love. Sometimes the love doesn't go anywhere. Sometimes we just have to redirect it and refocus it and give it another outlet, because the world wants us to believe love has to look a very specific way. The world wants us to believe that if love exists at all, then it needs to exist in a very specific way. But it doesn't. Sometimes the love exists and you can see that it exists and you can acknowledge that it exists, and you can choose to not be with that person, to not go after that thing, to not support said art or whatever, and recognize like, hey, just because the love for something like this exists, it doesn't mean that it will always exist forever. And it doesn't mean that because I don't know what to do with this love that I have anything to be ashamed about. I think that's something that's really, really important for us to remember. There's nothing wrong with having love for someone and then feeling frustrated or upset that you feel like your love is going unanswered or unheard of. And like you, even though you can see that the love you have for this person is almost like it's falling on deaf ears, it's like oftentimes I feel like people want to shame people who are kind of in this one sided love for loving someone who says they don't love them at all. And I think that's unfair. It is unfair for people to be told or expected to just erase the love someone had for someone like 100% and completely from their life after they find out like, oh hey, this didn't go the way that I planned or this relationship didn't happen as I wanted it to go. But just because it didn't go as you wanted it to go doesn't mean that you don't have to actually love and care for those people. It doesn't mean that the love never existed. You're just redirecting that love. The love exists and it's always been there. It just don't look the same anymore. So kind of how like things change and grow and it look different over time, so does love. Love that you had with one person, it may grow and change and it may look different. And honestly, the way it looks now may be completely opposed to what is necessary for that relationship to go on. And that can be why certain relationships don't work. And that is okay. And it's frustrating. Like, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's going to be like peaches and cream to get over like broken hearts or get over feeling like, oh, the love that I spent on this relationship is wasted, because it's not. It's That's never going to be easy because like you spent time, you spent love and you cared for people, and then you feel like the love that existed doesn't have anywhere to go. But the truth of the matter is like it likely doesn't, because I don't think it was ever meant to leave. It shifted and it changed, and the requirements needed to meet said love, or for said love to be applicable, just no longer works for the environment that it's in. And sometimes we have to come to terms with that reality and just keep it pushing. And that's the unfortunate part. But I think that's also the beauty of life, in that like you get to experience love in all of these different ways, and you get to see the way that your love and the love other people may have adapt and grow and change as they adapt and grow and change. And so like maybe we just have to change our relationship with the idea of love to recognize just how beautiful it actually is. And maybe, just maybe, loving, being loved, and understanding that our love can stay, our love can grow and change, and it won't always be the same, too, can be in art like everything else. So for this week's On Moment, I'm going to be talking about the Electric Lady album 2013. I'm not talking about the whole album, just one song by Janelle Monáe called What an Experience. So this song is probably one of my favorite songs in like all of time. And I love this song because in this song, Janelle Monáe is sort of talking about how, or more or less describing what it's like being in love, and it's like what an experience. Like that's the chorus, that's and it's being equated to love as an experience, love as something to live through and to feel wholly. And I love that idea because I do think sometimes we think too finite about the way people experience love or about the way we experience love. And and so sometimes, oftentimes, love when equated to like physical things, it reminds people of the finiteness. So like it's really cool that the way that Janelle Monáe did described, or at least how I experience or feel like love is being described in this song. I think it's really cool because it's an experience. It's something that happens that you get to live through and go through, and it's not described as something like finite. I don't know, this might just be a me, this is probably just a me thing, but when I feel or see love compared to objects or things that are fragile or things that are um, breakable, it reminds me how much pressure people put on this idea of love, and that's sort of what takes away from the experience. That's what, at least for me, so this is self anecdotal, but like it's sort of sad to see people, so like when like love is compared to sandcastles or love's compared to glass or all of these breakable things or things that aren't solid or things that deteriorate, for me it sometimes takes away from the idea of love really is intangible. Love is felt. It is something you feel wholly, and it is something that you live through as you would live through an experience. It is not something that is there to look pretty and exist, but one day not exist. As you experience things, sure, like time, duh, things come to an end, but to experience something is to be in it, not just to see it and expect it to look a certain way. And I think kind of which relates to today's conversation with like where does the love go? Sometimes it is best to be in it, to experience love, than to honestly look towards love as having to look a very specific way, or looking at love as having to be a very specific person or a very specific thing. So it was like we saw that kind of referencing what we talked about earlier. We saw that with Dean, sort of like in the movie, Dean has this really idealistic idea of love and what that should do for a person. And that's not what his and Cindy's relationship ended up being. And then we see Haesung and Nora. Haesung definitely like had an idea of what loving Nora would be like, but Nora wasn't that person, and Nora wasn't able to be that person. Nora wanted more, and that's ultimately why they had to part. And so it's just like when you expect love to be a certain way, when you expect love to look a very specific way, it can often disappoint me. And so that's why and that's why I love this song actually, um, because it's not looking for love to be a specific thing, but it's just love, what an experience, love as an experience. And I think that's beautiful. But yeah, that's all I have for today's episode. Thank you for listening. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter, handles are on the screen. Be Lovely Infinite. That's my personal. If you want to follow the channel, the pages for Art Like Studios, that's Art Like Studios on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. If you'd like to follow the podcast on YouTube, it is Art Like Podcast Network. That's all I have for you today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have any favorite movies you like to watch around Valentine's Day, drop those in the comments as well, because I want to do a movie marathon and I think it would be a lot of fun to watch things that people enjoy watching around Valentine's Day. So, what are your favorite movies to watch around Valentine's Day? Let me know. Drop it in the comments. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.